convene. Robert, I'm just checking the mic. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you fine, thanks.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to have the commissioners introduce themselves, starting with those here on my right.
Nikos Leverins, Common Cause of Hawaii.
I'm Janet Mason from the League of Women Voters.
Robert?
Aloha. Aloha. Robert Harris, the Executive Director of the Hawaii State Ethics Commission.
Hello?
Hi, good afternoon. Flo Nakakuni, former U.S. Attorney.
Kristen?
Good afternoon, Kristen. Izumi Nitao, Executive Director, Campaign Spending Commission.
Okay. Okay. First order of business is the approval of the minutes for July 13 meeting 2022. We've circulated the draft. Members have made edits and revisions. If there's no further edits or revisions, the minutes are deemed approved. Okay, we'll move to item number 3, public testimony. Do we have any members of the public waiting to testify? Do we have somebody waiting to testify?
Yeah, Lynn Matiso.
Oh, please,
Okay.
Let's hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you. I sent in written testimony. I'm just going to go a little off from that, but I stand on the written testimony. Today's Star Advertiser poll says the legislature gets low marks for handling of corruption. 81% said enough hasn't been done. The opaque gang of 76 doesn't get it. After the Supreme Court outlawed gut and replace, the 76 kept struggling to find ways around it. At least one bill was vetoed by the governor because of this travesty. Legislators appear to seek revenge when one guts or kills another's bill. On May 27, Civil Beat reported Senator Donovan De La Cruz suddenly moved onto conference committees negotiating the fate of bills sponsored by Representative Nicole Lowen. He did this 4 times. Then he quickly vanished from the committees. Out of 13 switches made on April 28th and 29th, 8 involved De La Cruz and Lowen's bills. The switching must stop. It's more like I have the power and the public doesn't matter. This is a public that spent hours poring over bills, writing testimony, appearing at hearings, etc., and it seems to be jettisoned into the waste heap. Additionally, revised agenda is sent out with items added and deleted almost up to the hearing. This practice is more pronounced with conference committees. De La Cruz was pushing Senate Bill 2510, which dealt with renewable energy. It would have forced each island's renewable energy portfolio to include a certain percentage of renewables like wood or biodiesel to fire generators. He got it passed. Fortunately, it was vetoed by the governor. But this wouldn't have happened if we had some controls on the members. And I think, that they need to understand this and that the public is watching and that they have to stop acting like 2-year-olds and start acting like adults. They're public servants. We're not their slaves. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have received your written testimony. Robert, question?
No, Lynn, I just want to thank you for your written testimony. I thought it was very succinct, on point, very, you cover a number of different topics, but is very, very articulate and well done. So thank you for submitting that.
Thank you. I leave it to you to flesh out the details.
Are there any questions from any commissioners?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I recognize a familiar face down at the bottom. Kat? Okay, is your audio on, Kat?
Okay, yep,
Okay.
now it is.
Very good.
I wanted to report that after either the last meeting or the meeting before that, OIP came out with a decision saying that public testimony could be given at the beginning of the meeting and also at the end of the meeting to discuss things that were discussed at the meeting. So I would like to reserve my comments till the end of the
Okay,
meeting.
we're just, Kat, we're not under the sunshine law, so we're just having.
Oh, I forgot,
public
you're with the
testimony.
legislature.
Yeah,
No sunshine.
At the beginning. So would you like to give some testimony now?
Well, I just wanted to say about open records. One of the problems when you request information from an agency, sometimes you just get this huge box of stuff that's dumped and there's no context, no nothing. And several years ago, there was a public hearing on suicides in our correctional facilities. And it was incredible because the committee asked public safety for documents from internal affairs about things that happened in the prison that resulted in somebody's death. And the department just gave the Senate 2 big boxes of stuff, not files, just paper dumped in a box. And the Senate lawyers could not make heads or tails out of this. There was no context. So I hope that when you discuss about open records, that when the community or a person requests open records, that they get things that are in context instead of a huge data dump. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Does anyone have any questions for Kat? If not, you have no more public testimony. Okay, then we'll move on to item number 4, the general discussion on open meetings and open records, led by Janet and Nikos. Janet?
Thank you, Chair. Today, we're going to talk about 4 main areas of transparency and open government. The first is the 2 laws that Hawaii has regarding sunshine at public meetings. And the second, as Kat just mentioned, the Uniform Information Practices Act. Then the second topic will feature Brian Black, who will give us an advocate's perspective on the question of transparency. Nikos, our commissioner, is going to summarize problems that agencies have reported in complying with the laws. And finally, Randy Roth is joining us. He will talk about transparency and accountability, how important they are in building and maintaining trust in government. So let's start with Cheryl. Cheryl Kakazu Park is the longest serving director of Hawaii's Office of Information Practices, having been initially appointed in 2011. In addition to her executive branch service, Cheryl has extensive prior experience in the Hawaii State Legislature and in the judiciary in both Hawaii and Nevada. She was also in private practice as a partner in a major Honolulu law firm, which she left in 1991. I guess Wanderlust got to her. She lived in Europe for 3 years, and then Nevada for 16 years, where she worked in both financial planning and law. She returned home to Hawaii in 2011, and in addition to a very demanding job, she volunteers on the board of directors of the Hawaii State Bar Foundation, Beta Beta Gamma Foundation, and the Law School Alumni Association. She's also served as a volunteer mediator and a pro bono attorney at the district court. Thank you, Cheryl, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you and the commissioners for inviting me today to provide you with an overview of the Office of Information Practices, or OIP, and Hawaii's open records and open meetings laws. I will provide a quick overview of OIP and the 2 open government laws that we administer. There is not enough time to fully educate you today, so I will tell you how you can get more detailed training and information on OIP's website at oip.hawaii.gov. You can also ask to be added to our email list for our What's New articles that provide you with updates and unbiased open government news. So I'd like to start now by sharing my screen so that I can run through some slides that I prepared for today. Let's see. OIP was created in by the way, actually, you can't see it. Let's see. I wanted to start from the beginning, but why isn't my slide going there? Sorry for this. It's not quite working the way I had hoped it would after setting it all up. So let me stop sharing and try again. Sorry. What, maybe I can ask your tech people why it isn't allowing me to share my screen.
Cheryl, would you like our tech person to run it for you instead?
I was hoping to do it because I have some different animations that I wanted to run, and somehow it's not working. And I practiced earlier, so sorry about this.
Okay, we'll just give you a minute.
Huh. I had it all set up. Sorry, I'm really sorry. Are you, okay, let me see. Do you see that now?
I'm not sure you have your camera on.
No, but it shouldn't matter. Do you
No, we are not seeing your
see?
screen.
Because I don't have the slide, the screen sharing feature. It's not dependent on my camera, it's dependent on my screen, but you still don't see anything, huh?
Correct.
No.
We do not see a screen share.
Can your tech ask me again if I can screen share somehow?
He has enabled it, apparently.
Has enabled it.
If you look at the bottom of the Zoom screen, sometimes you see a green share screen.
Okay, wait, I'll pull that up again.
We are now seeing your screen.
Do you see? I don't see it. Okay, do you see this one? The slideshow from the, it's not working. Okay,
The suggestion was try closing PowerPoint and open it up again.
Whatever you just did move between slides for a brief second.
what are you seeing? Are you seeing the slides?
We are seeing your full PowerPoint, which includes the slides and the outline on the left. So I see you scrolling through them now.
Okay,
If you go to present, if you go to
wrong.
present,
It's the wrong one. It's showing my different screen. It's the different screen that you're looking at then. Because I have
Yeah,
two.
understood. Yeah, so we're probably on the wrong monitor, but we do see your Office of Information Practice slide. I don't know if you want to just go ahead and present from that.
How about a quick recess, just a short recess?
Sorry. created in 1988. Oh, sorry, are we back in the meeting?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
OIP was created in 1988, 34 years ago, as part of Hawaii's Uniform Information Practices Act, or UIPA, found at Chapter 92F HRS. Amazingly, the UIPA was passed in just one legislative session, immediately after the December 1987 report of the Governor's Committee on Public Records. House Bill 2002, which was ultimately adopted by the 1988 legislature, was largely based on the Model Uniform Information Practices Act that was developed by the National Commissioners on Uniform State Laws and the Federal Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. As a fun fact, the first staff attorney hired by OIP and who worked for nearly 3 decades here had been the committee clerk of the House Judiciary Committee, which was chaired by Representative Wayne Metcalf, the sponsor of House Bill 2002. So OIP administers, let's see, does the next slide. Okay, OIP administers 2 laws, and it was originally set to administer the UIPA, which is Hawaii's Open Records Law, found at HRS Chapter 92F, that provides the public with access to government records. 10 years later, in 1998, OIP was given the additional responsibility for administering the state's Sunshine Law, which is the Open Meetings Law, found at Part 1 of Chapter 92. Now, all state, county, and independent agencies such as UH and OHA, as well as most boards, are subject to one or both of the laws that OIP administers. This includes the Governor's Office, Lieutenant Governor's Office, Judiciary, Legislature, Executive Branch departments and agencies, mayors, county councils, county departments and agencies, and boards like the State Board of Land and Natural Resources and Honolulu Board of Water Supply, to name a few. OIP is the single agency that administers both the UIPA and Sunshine Law throughout the state of Hawaii. OIP is the one-stop shop for all UIPA and Sunshine Law issues for all state and county agencies and most boards in all 3 branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. OIP is a neutral. We don't represent anyone, and we provide advice to everyone. You may be surprised to learn that OIP has no enforcement powers. So if you want to hold someone in contempt, fine them, lock them up, remove them from office, or force them to do something, then you'll have to go to the courts. And you can go directly to court without seeking OIP's assistance first. But agencies will typically follow OIP's advice without such coercion. Sometimes a simple call or a letter from OIP will remind them to respond or prod them into action. So an OIP written opinion or court action are usually not necessary. Sometimes an OIP opinion is needed because agencies might need a clear legal ruling, such as where they may otherwise be subject to litigation if they disclose confidential business information. Most times, though, agencies don't want to risk having OIP write an opinion against them, and instead will voluntarily comply with our advice rather than face the court of public opinion with bad press. If an agency does appeal an OIP opinion to the courts, it will be subject to the palpably erroneous standard of review, which means that the courts will generally defer to OIP's opinion, so the agency won't have an easy time overturning our opinion. How does OIP do all its work? With only 8.5 full-time positions, of which there are 5 staff attorneys and me as director. OIP has one additional worker that is immune from COVID and is always on call 24/7 year-round, including state holidays and weekends, and can be found at oip.hawaii.gov. Here is what the website looks like. Through our extensive online training materials, OIP is able to proactively provide training and information so that government agencies and boards can properly comply with the laws in the first place. And I'll highlight the main pages, starting with this red arrow you see, which is the training page. You'll find extensive training materials, videos, quick reviews, tips, and analyses, which are free and accessible 24/7. Because the online training materials are here and would take too much time, more than 15 minutes, for you to learn, I'm not going to repeat them today. OIP supplements this training with timely updates through its What's New articles, which OIP emails directly to people on its list and archives here on its website. If you want to directly receive these articles, just email OIP with your address and ask to be added to the What's New email list. By clicking on this drop-down menu next to Laws, Rules, and Opinions, you can find the UIPA and Sunshine Law, OIP's administrative rules, and recent or important court cases. All formal OIP opinions are indexed and posted in full. Informal, or what we call memoranda opinions, are summarized, but they are not considered precedential and apply only to the parties directly involved, so they are not indexed. For copies of the full memo opinion, you can ask OIP. The legislation page has the legislative history of our laws and any revisions to them, including the entire 4-volume Governor's Report of 1987 that preceded the adoption of House Bill 2002 and the UIPA. OIP's forms and checklists are found on the forms page. Please note that requesters do not have to use OIP's form to make a UIPA record request, but it helps to ensure that agencies have sufficient information to process the request and provides helpful information for the requester. OIP's reports, including its annual summaries and state and county UIP record request log summaries, are posted on the reports page. And we also have links to the state calendars and county calendars and various other sites, including the State Ethics Commission and State Campaign Commission websites. So excluding OIP's own usage, our website gets about 30,000 unique hits per year. So many people are helping themselves by using our website materials. In fiscal year 2022, OIP also directly received over 1,600 total requests for services. Most of these requests were answered the same day or within 24 work hours through our Attorney of the Day or AOD service that provides quick, informal, non-binding advice. In fiscal year 2022, the number of AODs more than doubled to 1,448, which took a lot of attorney time from resolving other types of cases. Because in addition to these informal requests, OIP opened 175 new formal cases in fiscal year 2022, and we resolved over 70% of them in the same fiscal year. Formal cases consist of requests for assistance in getting records from other agencies, UIPA requests for OIP's own records, questions that require written correspondence, requests for advisory opinions about the UIPA or Sunshine Law, which do not involve live cases or controversies, and appeals to OIP from other agencies' denial of UIPA record requests or regarding alleged violations of the Sunshine Law. Now that 2 new laws have gone into effect in early July, OIP is busy working to revise its training materials to post online. Also, during this interim, OIP has been charged by the Senate and House in Senate Concurrent Resolution 192 to convene a working group that has been tasked to develop recommendations for a new UIPA exception for deliberative and pre-decisional agency records that would reasonably balance the public's interest in disclosure and the agency's ability to fully consider and make sound and informed decisions. Other than this working group and an intended budget request to increase OIP's positions and funding, OIP does not currently have legislative proposals that it is considering. Specifically, OIP has no proposal that would affect this commission, as OIP's laws do not set standards of conduct and are just used to obtain information as to whether standards of conduct established in other laws have been followed. OIP would ask that the commission not recommend any legislative changes to the UIPA or Sunshine Law without obtaining our input first, because there's so many interrelated parts to each statute, specific phrasing that should be used, and various competing considerations. And statutory revisions could easily result in confusion, contradiction, or unintended consequences. The biggest help that we would like to ask or call upon this commission to help us with is to support our request for 2 additional positions and increased funding so that we can do all our work and eliminate our backlog. So now that you know about OIP and what we do, I'd like to talk briefly about the laws that we administer. And both the UIPA and Sunshine Law have this common purpose. It is the policy of this state that the formation and conduct of public policy, the discussions, deliberations, decisions, and actions of government agencies shall be conducted as openly as possible. The public and media rely upon these open government laws to obtain information that will let them know how government is being run and to hold it accountable, which is critical to maintaining public trust in government. In my remaining time, I will briefly explain the laws, starting with the UIPA. The first thing you have to realize about the UIPA is that it is a disclosure statute, not a confidentiality statute designed to keep information secret. The default under the UIPA is to disclose government records unless there are lawful reasons to not disclose them, which I'll discuss shortly. There are 2 distinct parts to the UIPA involving access to different types of government records. Part 2 applies to government records that are accessible by the public. Part 3 also applies to government records, but only if they are personal records that are about an individual, which then gives that individual the right to access them and to ask for corrections by the agency. I don't have time today, though, to talk about personal records. So under Part 2, certain types of government records must be disclosed under Section 92F 12A, such as rules of procedure, final opinions, the minutes of all agency meetings required by law to be public, land ownership, transfer, and lien records, and the name and certain other information relating to government employees, except undercover law enforcement officers. But 92F 13 recognizes that there are certain exceptions to disclosure, and an agency may keep records or may withhold records if they fall under one of these exceptions. The first is for records that when disclosure would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. Only individuals, not businesses, have privacy rights. Examples of information in which an individual has a significant privacy interest are provided in another section, 92F-14. The second exception would be for records that would not be discoverable in the prosecution or defense of any judicial or quasi-judicial action to which the state or county may be a party. For example, records protected by the attorney-client privilege or work product doctrine may be withheld. The third exception is for records that must be kept confidential for the government to avoid a frustration of a legitimate government function. Examples are law enforcement records, ongoing investigations, examination materials, government purchasing information, proprietary information, or confidential business information. The SCR 192 working group that I mentioned earlier is specifically looking at this section for potential revisions to recommend to the legislature. The fourth exception under Part 2 is for records that are protected from disclosure by state or federal law or court order. And finally, there's a special legislative exception for inchoate and draft working papers of legislative committees, including budget worksheets and unfiled committee reports, work product, records or transcripts of an investigating committee of the legislature, which are closed by rules, and the personal files of members of the legislature. The UIPA at section 92F19 also prohibits an agency's disclosure of government records to other agencies unless certain limitations are met. Now let's turn to the Sunshine Law, which is Hawaii's open meetings law and found only in Part 1 of HRS Chapter 92. Now, Section 92-1 defines the board as any agency, board, commission, authority, or committee of the state or its political subdivisions, which is created by constitution, statute, rule, or executive order, to have supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power over specific matters, and which is required to conduct meetings and to take official actions. Regardless of what it is called, an entity is considered a Sunshine Law board if it meets this definition. So the Sunshine Law includes all county councils, OHA, the UH, Board of Regents, the Board of Education, and neighborhood boards, to name a few. In case you're wondering, in fact, as you know, this commission is not a Sunshine Law board subject to these requirements. Note, however, that the Sunshine Law Board also does not apply to private boards such as condominium associations. Now, the Sunshine Law has several basic requirements that I'll highlight. Wait a minute, where did it go? Okay, it's out of order. The Sunshine Law's basic requirements include: 1, all discussions, deliberations, and decisions by board members regarding board business must be conducted at a meeting open to the public. Every meeting must be open to the public unless specifically allowed to be closed by law. The board must provide 6 calendar days advance notice of the meeting, including an agenda, as well as access to the board packet if one has been prepared. The board must accept testimony from the public on each agenda item, and oral testimony cannot be limited to being allowed only at the start of the meeting per the new Act 264 that Kat mentioned earlier, that went into effect on July 8th of this year. And finally, the board must keep minutes. There are now 9 permitted interactions, which are the only times that board members can discuss board matters without following these normal requirements. Now, before COVID, all meetings were held in person, but since January 1st, 2022, boards are allowed to conduct remote meetings held over the internet using interactive conference technology, like what we're doing today. A fun fact, the very day and only about an hour before the Capitol shut down in March 2020 due to COVID, I was there at the Capitol ready to testify on a bill where OIP was proposing amendments that would have allowed for remote meetings. The governor's emergency orders suspending the Sunshine Law ultimately allowed boards to continue to meet and work via the internet until the law could be amended the next session. So now, with the changes in the Sunshine Law, there are essentially 3 different ways that a board could hold a meeting. And one is a traditional way, completely in person with everyone at a physical location. The second is in a multi-site meeting, which was recognized before January 2022, but refined. So this is also an in-person meeting where all board members and the public may attend, but there might be multiple sites connected by interactive conference technology like Zoom. And you may also have additional locations for the public's convenience where there's not going to be any board members and the meeting won't be stopped if connection to that additional location is interrupted or lost. So just remember, the multi-site meeting still is an in-person meeting for board members. Then finally, the new way is a remote meeting, which is held over the internet where members of the board or the public can participate online and need not be meeting at one location in person. But the law still requires the board to provide one in-person meeting site for those people without the skills, desire, equipment, or internet service to participate remotely. But board members need not attend at this in-person site. So those are the three ways now that you can conduct meetings. I know I've raced through a lot of things. I haven't talked about a lot of things, but here is where you can go for help and more information. First of all, to our website at oip.hawaii.gov, and you can call our attorney of the day or email them, fax, or write to us. And by the way, that picture of the person is not one of us. So I'll stop here and thank you all again for allowing me to share this information about OIP and our laws with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. We did have one issue that several of the commissioners have encountered over the years, and it concerns regular requests from the county councils for certain exemptions from the Sunshine Law. I don't think they did this in this latest session of the legislature, but why have they persisted, do you think?
Well, they persist because they feel that they are the legislative branch of government, just like the legislature. The legislature has exempted itself from the Sunshine Law. And, you know, I can understand both sides because the legislature couldn't get any work done if they had to give advance notice 6 days in advance, right, under the Sunshine Law and follow all those requirements. And they only meet 4 months of the year. The county councils, on the other hand, meet year round, so they can meet the 6-day advance notice. They have been doing it, and they deal with more, you know, different types of issues, not big statewide policy, but more, you know, county specific, people's zoning variances and things like that, that I don't think that they really need to have an exemption from the Sunshine Law, which is why OIP has consistently opposed having them exempted from the Sunshine Law. So I hope that answers your question. You know, we're with you every year opposing those proposals that would exempt the county councils from the Sunshine Law, but they keep trying.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Are there any other questions for Cheryl?
Yeah, I had a brief question. Prior to your testimony, Cap Brady talked about a scenario where the legislature asked for materials from the PSD, Department of Public Safety, and they provided information that wasn't really germane to the request. So beyond a lawsuit, what kind of recourse does a person or even the legislature have under, you know, the UIPA to get information that is relevant, you know, to the inquiry as well as in a timely manner? Could you just talk briefly about that?
Well, the UIPA requires agencies to provide records that they maintain. It doesn't require agencies to create a summary or a report or to answer questions. The UIP is strictly to provide records that they already have and maintain. So in that case, it sounded like the PSD did its duty in providing the records that it had. It was under the UIPA, at least, it was not under any obligation to put them in a report summary or create a summary for the requester. That's up to the requester to go and do themselves. And you know, more often we get complaints because the agencies do not provide the records, you know, and we have to remind them, hey, look, under the UIPA, you have to provide these records. Sometimes, though, the requests are so broad that what you get is going to be a lot of stuff. If you want something just very narrow, then maybe you should really narrow your request to what it is exactly that you want. And that way you could get the requests in a more timely manner, hopefully, and not be hit with any big fees and costs, which I do want to point out that we have a UIPA record request log that we ask all state and county agencies to keep. And, you know, at the end of every year, excuse me, they're supposed to turn in their log results to us. We compile them all. The raw data is posted on data.hawaii.gov. And then we go through the data and look at what the results are by state and by counties. And those reports are posted on our website under the reports page. And for example, like the latest one that we have is for fiscal year 21, you know, because the fiscal year 22s are just coming in now. So in fiscal year 21, we found that 90% of all requesters paid nothing for their UIP record requests. That's 90%. Only 10% paid any amount. And of this 10%, 47% of them paid less than $5. And 37% paid between $5 to $49.99 for their requests. There were only 29 requesters, 15% of all paying requesters, who paid $50 or more per request. And at least 18 of them, or 62% of them, were reported by the agencies as representing law firms, media, commercial, or other for-profit or nonprofit organizations. So the point is, people complain about the cost, but they're getting the records for free. Mostly everyone is getting it for free. Most of them are getting everything waived, any fees waived, hardly any copying charges or costs. Where you're going to get the problems are with the complex record requests. That's where we always see the complaints arising. And if you want more information, it's all listed. It's all online. We have it all on our reports page. Anything else?
Kristen?
I have a question. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
So Cheryl, you probably have been reading a lot in the news. You know, there's a lot of sentiment to have the legislature subject to the sunshine laws. So can you just maybe share with us, you know, in this public forum, the you know, what you see as a problem or whether that is a viable possibility?
I don't know. We've never taken any kind of official position on it. Because they already are exempt from the sunshine laws because they have their own rules, you know, which over time I think have gotten a lot more transparent and better, you know. But I do see where it is going to be hard for them to meet all of the requirements that they impose on everybody else. And maybe that's a good thing because then they would know that it's not that easy, you know, to follow every aspect of the sunshine law, because you have all kinds of boards of with or without help that have to follow all of these requirements. And that's why when we testify on these things, we have to look at all these different potentially competing interests, to see what will actually work for everybody. So I don't want to answer that question because, that's not for me. We always say that's a policy matter for the legislature to adopt, to decide.
Sure. But, I didn't know whether or not you're able to, speak to any concerns, because I have a feeling people are going to submit something. And so, you're like the expert, and, I would definitely want to hear from you. I completely agree with your sentiments. And I think you've already voiced some as far as how they're, how often they meet, or rather how that they don't meet often. But if they're just some parameters, because again, this is a public meeting, and it's just kind of good to know if people are going to submit something, some concerns that they should think about, you know what I mean? When they're, because flat out saying it's sort of just like my position on public funding. I think it's a great thing, but we need to see what the resources are going to look like, So same thing with sunshine law and, the open records law. If you have any guidance for those who are listening, or, read the minutes as to concerns in bills that they may submit or talk to their legislators about. Do you see what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to, I don't know, I wouldn't want to comment until I see what the specific proposals are, It's hard to comment on something you don't know, I wouldn't want to make something up. And it isn't something that we have thought about because we got a lot of fish to fry right now. We always do. And this year we are really focusing on what the legislature charged us to do in that concurrent resolution. And that's taking up a lot of time.
Any other questions? Well, Cheryl, thank you very much.
Sorry.
Robert, sorry.
Thank you. Sorry. Really quick. Good to see you, Cheryl. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate your input today. And thanks for the information. Obviously, on a matter that's gotten a lot of public attention on the cost of, again, the purported cost of a lot of the information requests. And so I appreciate your feedback on that, and maybe sort of saying maybe it's a more narrow issue. I think I just ask, do you have any other thoughts on sort of maybe helping resolve that issue? For example, in the situations where there are high costs, some type of way, another way of trying to resolve it. I don't know if your office actively handles any appeals in that situation. Again, just curious if you have any other input or thoughts on sort of how to bridge the gap, it seems, between two different points of view.
Well, our office always sees those kinds of complaints. And so we try to mediate it, and we'll ask the agency, justify. And we have cases that say, hey, you can't just tell us it's going to cost thousands of dollars. What's your basis for saying so? What kind of survey did you do of your records, and how much time is it going to take? So do a sample, maybe spend an hour and see how far along you get, and then multiply that by what you think, how much longer you're going to need to complete your search and review and segregation. You can't just make up high costs to scare away a record requester. And we actually came out with an opinion that warned an agency that they shouldn't do that, recently. On the other hand, there's always two sides to the story. And there a lot of times these record requests start off so broad that it will take a lot of time to gather all this information, and you're going to get a lot of junk unless you decide to narrow it down. And that's where we already have a system in place where the agency can ask the requester for clarification of what it is they want. And the agency will say, well, we think it's going to cost you this much, and we want prepayment of 50% of it, say, before we start. And then when we get through that halfway point, we can readjust, we can see if it's going to cost more or less, and continue from there. So there is a process already in place. And a lot of things that people want to go and have a law for actually should be done through our rules and are being done through our rules. You know, I think that's the appropriate place to really address many of these issues, rather than say, by law, you have to do it in a certain amount of time, because you know what? They're not going to meet it anyway if the request is so broad or, time voluminous, So it really depends. There's two sides to every story, and we look at both sides when we address a case.
Thank you. Thank you for the feedback.
Okay, thank you so much, Cheryl, for taking the time to prepare the presentation and for coming. Next, we're going to hear from one of Hawaii's premier advocates for open government, and I think Nikos is prepared to introduce him.
Hi, it's my pleasure to introduce Brian Black, who is the president and executive director of the Civil Beat Law Center for the Public Interest. Instilled with a strong community service ethic at Punahou School, Mr. Black led the Civil Liberties Union at Harvard University, specialized in public law at Cornell University, clerked for a federal district court in Connecticut, and served as the inaugural fellow for the National Center on Philanthropy and the Law at New York University. Prior to his current position, Mr. Black joined the Department of the Corporation Counsel for the City and County of Honolulu. So he has experience on both sides of the ledger here, and we look forward to his presentation. Thank you, Brian, for patching in from the continent, and good to see you again.
Yeah, hey everybody. I appreciate the intro. So I thought if the slides can come up, if not, I can put them up. But is it easier for me to put them up?
Whatever works for you.
There we go. She's got it. All right. So I thought it would make sense in my mind to, with the purpose of this commission, to think about some of the areas where there are problems. So the next slide, please. So one of the things that that I think this commission, at least from its prior work and everything, probably recognizes, and from the Star Advertiser poll today, but the status quo as far as public trust in government, it's not working. And it's not a question of tinkering around the edges. I mean, there really needs to be some change here. And when it comes to public records and open meetings and concerns about corruption, there is a lot that can be done to sort of help the public understand what it is that the government does and what's happening with their government, and help them, whether or not they agree with what's going on, at least to have better confidence that they understand what's happening. And I think that confidence and understanding is what is causing the trust problems. It's just not really knowing what's going on and not really understanding how things work, and not seeing that anyone really understands how things work except for the people who are in government or affiliated in some way. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about former Senator English's the information that came out in the context of his prosecution was his comment that it was easy to kill a bill, and I think that illustrates when you make it easy, that's when corruption can happen. And so some of the things that I think contribute to at least when I was thinking about it, some of the things that came to mind to me that contribute to making it easy for an environment for people to take advantage is when there's a lack of access to information and when power is consolidated in various ways. And so my proposals are focused on some of those aspects, focused on making sure that at least more people are able to educate the public and get information out there, and in breaking up some of the power that is consolidated, particularly at the legislature. Next slide, please. So the couple things that I want to focus on, and I'm happy to answer questions. In particular, I have thoughts about some of the questions that were asked to Cheryl, if anybody wants to ask me. But I wanted to emphasize in particular SB 3252. Now, this is one of the ones that this commission had in its interim report, and that the legislature passed unanimously, but then the governor vetoed. And I think there's a lot of misinformation in the governor's rationale for the veto. And we had a community voice about it recently to address some of those issues. But really, this bill, and I hope that this commission will recommend again that this bill move forward, and that the legislature take it up again with the new governor, whoever that is. This bill will empower those who are really dedicated to ferreting out corruption. I think a great example of how this bill can help is what's been happening with respect to the affordable housing issues on the Big Island, and the work that Environment Hawaii did to just sort of go over public records and to educate people about what was happening. And then that turned into an investigation that ultimately led to indictments and pleas and everything with respect to what happened there. But that type of thing can happen more. It may not be corruption, but it may be inefficiencies. It may be just incompetence. The ability of the news media and nonprofits, the Red Hill issues, the bribery issues and permitting, all of those can be fleshed out more by those nonprofits that are focused on getting access to information and then educating the public about them. And that's what this bill is about. It's not about all requests and all requesters getting information for free. It's about a specific category of requesters, those that are focused on educating the public. So it's the standards build on some FOIA standards that are out there. It's focused on the language that's used is public interest requesters, information is requested in the public interest. And it's a very narrow set of requests. And OIP's reports have put out that the number of requests that are made in this category are about 5% per year. Or actually, no, I think it's 2 or 3% a year in their reports. That's a little that undercounts a little bit because that relies on the agencies to accurately check the box that says that it's a public interest request. We go through, the Law Center goes through each one of the actual logs, and we look for people that are very clearly public interest requesters but may not be tagged that way by the agencies. And so we think that the undercount, it's probably closer to 5% of requests, but it's still a very small number of folks that fall within this group. And I acknowledge that what Cheryl said about that a lot of requesters, they get their information for free, at least when you look at the logs. The problem is the logs are filled out by agencies. They're not always accurate, but in the end, it doesn't register when an agency says, pay this amount and then the person gives up on it. You don't see that in the logs. And that happens with these public interest requesters frequently. So I see it many times a month in which a requester will drop something because it's going to cost too much. So this is these costs are having a distinct impact on the public interest requesters, and having this carve out for them. It's not going to be for the commercial requesters or the attorneys or the folks who are paying, and we see that in the logs. They actually pay. It's not affecting them. They're still going to have to pay. So I do hope that the commission acknowledges the continuing need for this bill. It will have a huge impact, and I would hope that the legislature would take it up and that the new governor would actually allow it to pass. The one other thing that I would just say about this is that it's actually more a clarification of the law than it is anything new. It's just that the rules that are out there currently don't recognize the fact that it should be no charge for these public interest requesters. That it just discounts the cost. So I see, and I love questions along the way. So I see Robert has a question.
Thanks. I hope you don't mind me popping in on this one. So I guess one really easy one. Do you have a working definition of what is in the public interest, or again, I think you said it's modeled on the FOIA. Just be interested to see if that needs to be pulled into the legislation or more specifically defined to give guidance to agencies, what your opinion is. Then second question is probably a little bit more complex, which is, what about the situation where it is going to be a massive effort to respond to a request? How do you sort of create some force function of narrowing the scope of the ask, which is sort of what the charge does now? And I understand that may not be the most appropriate way to do it, but at least it does help sort of bridge the gap between what do you need and what can we provide cheaply? How do we sort of create that force function still?
Yep. So the first thing, the legislature in the first pass on this, and I'm sure they would do it again, directly referenced in the committee reports the connection to FOIA. So that standard has been around for 40 years. It's well established. OIP actually has adopted that standard for the existing law, at least in most part. I think I don't know if there's a little bit of a deviation, but it's a well-established standard at this point. I don't think that it would need to be spelled out any more than it already is in the SB 3252. And if it were spelled out more, then it may get more confusing, because then perhaps you're deviating from the established case law in the FOIA context. With respect to the potential burden issue, I think, one of the things that I consider misinformation is the idea that this would force agencies to commit to overtime, and they won't be able to get their jobs done and things like that. The rules are very clear that when you have complex requests, when you have a request that's going to be burdensome like that, the agencies can take their time. They're not bound by what is the typical timeline of 10 business days. You can get an extension for another 10 business days, but then you have to start disclosing records. When you have more complex requests, then the agencies can take their time and they can disclose things on a monthly basis. There's no like you have to finish within 6 months or anything like that. They can take as long as they need for however complex the request is. And these public interest requesters, your background, I'm sure they don't want things 2-3 years down the line, right? They want to get as much as they can up front. And so that delay aspect to it, if they're asking for everything under the sun, media, nonprofits, their interest is in getting things up front. That delay aspect is what is going to force them to narrow their request. And I have definitely seen folks start off with a broader request and then narrow it down when they know that there's going to be a delay. So that is money is an outright just stopping point. right? If you say it's going to cost X amount and X amount is beyond their budget, they'll give up, just give up, period. But if you say that it's going to take me a year to get you all of this stuff that you're asking for, then they can come back and they say, okay, well, that's a dialogue then, right? That's a discussion that can be had about narrowing it down. Money is an absolute bar, though.
Thank you. Really appreciate the response, and sorry for cutting you off halfway through.
I think Cheryl has something to say.
Yeah, I do. Because I disagree that with Brian's characterization of how this public interest waiver would have worked in Senate Bill 3252. The language used there, taken from FOIA, is different from what OIP has long recognized to be the public interest waiver in Hawaii. And FOIA has a different setup, which is why it doesn't work when you just plump it right back into the UIPA. And so we had questions about how that standard in the bill 3252 would actually work, because, for example, it no longer would be limited to information that was not readily available in the public domain. And the requester wouldn't have to have had the primary intention and actual ability to widely disseminate the information to the public. And it also said it didn't apply to commercial interests. So the questions we raised was like, does that mean that the bill's proposed fee waiver would allow, say, a student or an individual claiming a public interest to essentially have an agency do its research and work for free, even though it's already available on the agency's website or elsewhere? And even when the requester had no intent or ability to widely disseminate the information to the public? And would the bill allow only a nonprofit news organization to qualify for the fee waiver, but not for-profit news organizations or independent freelance reporters? The language was very, I think, confusing and contradictory to what we were already recognizing for the fee waiver that, under the UIPA. So we had a problem with some of that. Now, we like the bill because we wanted our positions and funding, but I can see why the other agencies had a real problem with that bill, because it wasn't as simple as what Brian is making it out to be. There were a whole bunch of other requesters that could have slid in now under that public interest waiver that didn't care how long it took for the agencies to respond, would add to the agency's work, and that would have an actual opposite effect of what he wanted, because then you don't have time. The agencies won't have time to work on the real ones that matter, that should be made public. And don't get me wrong, because I support free press. I appreciate all of these investigatory reports and that the press has come out with and brought to light the corruption and the problems with Red Hill and the problems with the Alawai and everything else. But when we're looking at changes to the law, we have to say, how do we interpret it? How do we administer this? What are the potential effects of
Cheryl, I am going to ask that we wrap up our discussion here, because we have a couple of other presenters, and maybe we could skip Nikos and allow Randy Roth to do the next presentation. Thank you very much. I can see that we have more work to do next year on Senate Bill 3252. Thank you both.
Are we going to allow Brian to
Yeah, let Brian finish.
finish?
Brian, you may have something else to finish up here?
Sure. Can I get the slides back? So I'll just say, so the other stuff was yeah, okay. When you're talking about the legislature, the Sunshine Law, it doesn't make sense. Like I've never argued that the Sunshine Law should apply to the legislature, but I do think that there are things that can be done to make what the legislature does more public. And just to give an example, the Constitution says that the legislature is supposed to have public decision-making meetings and committees and stuff. And whether or not it's constitutional is it's just ridiculous that we have these situations where the legislature holds these committee hearings, they take public testimony, and then they gavel out to discuss it. That's not a public decision-making, and that's where the public loses the what's going on part of it. For what is the government doing? Understand what's going on, because they lose the individual positions of the legislators and an understanding of what changes are going to be made. Then they gavel in and they just announce some move on. That aspect, that's not public decision making. I put aside the constitutional question, but just rulemaking wise, they should have debates and discussions in committees. It shouldn't just be testimony and then they announce a decision. And then the last thing I would mention is constitutional, and Cheryl probably has problems with this too, but a constitutional right of access. One of the biggest issues. Sorry, I missed the third one. Really quickly, just egalitarian distribution of power. One of the issues with committees is the fact that the members often are unable to bring things onto the agenda or to force things into a vote because the chair holds all the power. And if it were more egalitarianly distributed so that legislators could do that, then it would allow for the public to better understand where their individual elected representatives stand and where things are and how things are moving through the legislature. And then finally, the constitutional amendments and the right of access. Just to give one area where this is a huge problem, particularly with the legislature, is that no matter what you have in the law with respect to the public records law, the legislature will claim that they have a constitutional privilege to withhold information. And unless there is a constitutional right of access, they'll continue to do that. And that essentially gives them, regardless of the fact that the public records law applies to them, that gives them carte blanche to withhold information. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. So at this point, we are going to do a little switch up and ask Randy Roth to tell us about the importance of accountability and transparency in building and maintaining public confidence. I have a few words to say about Randy, a very distinguished professor who served on the law faculty at UH from 1982 until 2017. And he also served as president of the Hawaii Bar Association, the Hawaii Justice Foundation, and the Hawaii Institute for Continuing Legal Education. He co-authored a book which most of us are very familiar with, Broken Trust, together with Judge Sam King. And he asked me to let you know that this is now open access. It's available for free. He's the recipient of many awards for his work. Small Business Hawaii named him Civic Leader of the Year in 1993 and again in 1997. In 2000, the Star Bulletin included him on its list of 100 who made a difference in Hawaii during the 20th century. So we're so pleased to have you, Randy, and hope you can wrap this up for us in some way.
Thank you so much. I'm a big believer in accountability and transparency. I think if we're talking about trust in government, all roads lead to accountability and transparency. But when you look beyond those as abstractions and you start saying, just what does that mean? And why don't we have it in situations where, at least in theory, we've got it, whether it's transparency, accountability, whatever. And my starting point for the remarks I want to share with you today, certainly accountability and transparency are part of what I'm going to be suggesting, but my focus right now is on the end goal of public trust. And none of us needed to see the poll results in this morning's paper to know that public trust in government in Hawaii is abysmally low, I think is the quote. And I think all of us recognize that existing laws, at least in theory, could always be improved. There are always some new ideas, whether it's a law, open record, sunshine, whatever, or the various processes that go along with that, converting that law into actions that affect people. But, and I've listened to all of the testimony that you've heard. I had the option of looking at the old videos, which I thought, well, I'll just look at one or two. And I watched all of it and really thought you've been presented with some terrific ideas along the lines of what we can do with new laws or improved laws and processes. But in trying to decide how I could best add something to the mix, I've decided to focus on the watchdogs in the system, which of course are part of our law. I think that in public corruption scandals generally, certainly in the two that I'm going to be highlighting in my testimony, there really has been an absence of accountability and transparency, and tremendous amounts of public corruption. And the watchdogs that in theory, on paper, were there with the responsibility and the power to do something about it. With 2020 hindsight, it looks to me like they were pretty much asleep. And there may be really good explanations for that. They may have been underfunded. I could go on and on with possible explanations, but I'm not sure there are real good explanations, especially in the situations that I'm going to be highlighting. And it's conceivable to me that there are some explanations that are not good explanations. It's conceivable to me that even very highly regarded people with wonderful credentials who've done wonderful things for the community, it's conceivable to me that when they have been in positions of power as a watchdog of one kind or another, it's conceivable to me that they've gone along to get along, that they've kind of felt this code, if you will, of not ticking off the wrong people, and maybe felt like it wouldn't do any good if they said something anyway. I don't know. But when people that, as a practical matter, could accurately be described as powerless, at least when it comes to government, when they say something about or demonstrate a proclivity to go along to get along. I'm not upset about that. But when people who are part of the political elite, if you will, the people that have some degree of power, whether it's official or by virtue of their background, I have real high expectations for them. I don't think going along to get along, just kind of staying silent because that's the way it's done, I don't think that's acceptable. The two specific scandals in our history that I'm going to highlight are the ones that are described in great detail in the Broken Trust book, which is all about the Bishop Estate controversy of the 80s and 90s that climaxed in the late 1990s. And the book called Mailbox Conspiracy, which I think is one of the greatest books ever written in Hawaii about something having to do with Hawaii's history. And it's tempting to get into those in some detail and really look at the specifics of the lack of accountability and the lack of transparency. But time is limited, and I'm going to just highlight the watchdogs, the systems watchdogs, and how they performed in those two scandals. The Broken Trust story, I'll call it, because it's told in great detail in that book. When it finally did come to light in terms of investigations going on, there had been years and years of obvious trust abuse. And that's a private trust, so people could say, well, that's really not public corruption, that's a private trust. But obvious trust abuse, and in my opinion, the very strong appearance of corruption. And when I say corruption, I'm not defining corruption narrowly to where it involves a crime and somebody needs to go to prison. But corruption in terms of using the power one has by virtue of a government position in a way that doesn't watch out for who you're supposed to be watching out for, at least not first and foremost, that you're kind of watching out for yourself or special interests. I view that as a form of corruption, especially if it has a major negative impact on people. In the case of the Bishop Estate back then, the justices had been selecting the trustees. And again, these are trustees where there was obvious, serious breaches of trust, even before the investigations began. And the justices were selecting trustees with no legal authority to do so. The original will, the governing instrument, talked about justices of the Kingdom Supreme Court making selections. But years and years ago, the legal basis for the justices doing that was gone. A person, no matter who, a former princess who's died, nobody can change, unilaterally change the jurisdiction of which court does what thing. And the justices realized that because their fig leaf, if you will, was that they were doing this only unofficially as mere citizens, because it would be unlawful for them to try to do it officially as justices. So it was just unofficial. Well, first of all, that immediately created conflicts of interest for them when cases involving those trustees would come up, and here they are, the Supreme Court justices. Even more trouble, much more trouble, was that there was the appearance from the selections they were making, there was the appearance of political patronage. There was the appearance, worse yet, of mutual backscratching to where who they were selecting was somehow related to their own selection as justices. Again, just the appearances. There weren't watchdogs, whether it's with respect to these obvious serious breaches of trust by the trustees. There were attorney general after attorney general after attorney general with the power, responsibility to do something, court masters after court masters after court masters. And they managed not to see this world record for breaches of trust. but there are also official watchdogs that should have been saying something about the impropriety of what the justices were doing, and maybe even put a spotlight on this appearance that it was somehow self-serving, that it was somehow a form of political patronage. Here in Hawaii, I think some people didn't want to talk about it. It made them feel uncomfortable. Back before any of the investigations in Hawaii began, the Wall Street Journal had a front page article describing Bishop Estate, and the reporters, you could just tell they practically, their jaws dropped when they were learning about these obvious breaches of trust and the role of these justices. And in terms of the political patronage, this was, again, before anything erupted so far as the local investigations are concerned. They described Bishop Estate as a deluxe home for current and former public servants. Again, as viewed from the outside. Yet, not just the attorney general, the masters, but these watchdogs for the justices, like the Judicial Selection Commission, which has to make retention decisions, the Bar Association, which should have been saying something, asking questions about what I believe was obvious impropriety. There's a Judicial Conduct Commission. There are a variety of organizations. None of them seem to see anything worth talking about. Well, eventually, prodded by outside forces, various watchdogs did start doing their job. And what they discovered was, quite literally, a world record of breaches of trust by these trustees. And I say it quite literally. I've detailed all the breaches, and I have discussed it face-to-face with many trust law professors around the country, including those that are very personally involved and on a long-term basis in various legal processes, trying to understand trust law and help it develop in a good direction. I've given talks at 4 law schools across the country about these issues, and law professors and you name it have said, yeah, I think this was the high water mark. I think this was the world record, et cetera. And these are the trustees that have been selected by these justices. 60 Minutes, when it did its report in 2000, okay, this climaxed in late 1999. In the year 2000, they did a report, and they said that these trustees selected by these justices had turned this charitable trust into a this is a quote, a multi-billion-dollar candy store for the state's political establishment. And our watchdogs hadn't seen anything until prodded by outside forces. I'd love to spend time, there isn't time, but I'd love to go into the detail of why there really wasn't any accountability for those trustees. Some people say, well, they were ousted, they were kicked out of their jobs. Well, that's kind of like catching somebody leaving the bank they've robbed with the loot. You say, well, keep what you've got today and keep what you've taken every day in the past, but don't come back. We're not going to let you into this establishment anymore. That's not accountability. They didn't have to pay. There was this global settlement, which resulted in them not having to pay a penny of repayment to the trust of monies they improperly took for themselves, improperly paid to others. They didn't have to pay a penny in court-ordered surcharges that in some cases already been determined, the exact amount. You have to pay this amount. Nope, we just wiped that off the slate. The state attorney general's office was saying that they had caused the trust damage of at least $50 million. Those damages just get wiped off. So again, just jumping to the bottom line, no real accountability for the trustees, even less for the justices. Even less for the justices. And again, there were organizations there with the power and responsibility to do something. some years after all of this kind of died down, the American Judicature Society formed a committee called its Committee on Judicial Independence and Accountability. Perfect committee for what I wanted to bring to its attention. By judicial independence, what that means is if somebody's unfairly criticizing a judge or a justice, they should do what they can to protect judicial independence by counteracting that improper criticism. By accountability, of course, if there are indications of wrongdoing of any kind by somebody who's a judge or a justice, obviously they should do something. Well, I met before that group and I said, quote, "Something is wrong with the system of judicial accountability when serious questions can be raised about the conduct of a state's entire Supreme Court without an official body either coming to the defense of those justices or taking steps to hold those justices accountable. Given the seriousness and specificity of the allegations in the Broken Trust essay and book, one would expect some kind of response. Thus far, the silence has been deafening." I challenged them to take their collective head out of the sand and look at this. And if they think our criticism is not well-founded, then they should criticize us and protect those justices. On the other hand, what I believe would have happened if they had taken a look is they would have recognized that there really needed to be some form of accountability for those justices. The other major scandal, I'll go through it quickly, the mailbox conspiracy, which again, I used the name from the book as everybody in Hawaii knows. There was a whole lot more involved than just the mailbox scam, if you will. This one, unlike the Broken Trust, where you had lots of wrongdoing, real obvious, here it was hidden. It was not easily unearthed. One of my concerns is it was unearthed because of something that was almost a fluke, blind luck. A federal public defender who did what I honestly believe is the greatest lawyering job in the history of the world. Now, maybe some would say that's an overstatement. If there's been a greater lawyering job done than what Alexander Silvert did for his client, I've yet to see it. His client, somebody he's never met before, has a court-appointed attorney, and court-appointed attorneys are kind of used to meeting new clients that say they're innocent, but don't have much to back it up, and oftentimes are determined to have been guilty of something, maybe not what they were charged with, but oftentimes something. And his new client comes in and says, "Well, I've been accused of a serious crime, but they're all lying. There are a bunch of witnesses and they've got a videotape and they have witnesses that say it's me on the tape, but they're all lying." And Alexander, I'm sure, says to himself, okay. But then he says, well, who are these people who are lying? Well, it starts with the chief of police, the third in charge, top prosecutor's office, and a number of people from the so-called elite criminal intelligence unit of the police department. But they're all lying. They're all lying. Well, I think the odds of a lawyer going from there to where he actually is able to assemble evidence that convinces him that his client is innocent and convinces him that a lot of other people are guilty. And there were very active efforts on the part of very powerful people to prevent him from getting that evidence, but he got it anyway. Boy, can hardly wait. He's going to go into this trial defending his client and show the world what really happened, except the police chief on the witness stand right off the bat, intentionally, it couldn't have been more obvious, intentionally caused a mistrial. And at the time, Alexander knows what's going on, but everybody else is, wow, is he really that stupid or what? Because it just was so obvious what he said with purpose was going to accomplish what it accomplished, which was to have this thing a mistrial. Very, very troubling. In the meantime, where are the watchdogs? Well, I mentioned we've got a chief of police involved, and there is a watchdog, the police commission. Let me read to you a quote from its chairperson the day after the police chief had obviously intentionally caused a mistrial. The police commission chair said, quote, "I think the chief has acknowledged that he made a mistake. He's apologized. He deeply regrets it, and we need to move on from here and concentrate on running the police department as efficiently as we can." Now, maybe there is some explanation that would support that as something other than outrageously wrong, which is what I think it was. But I don't know of any efforts to figure out why that particular watchdog, the police commission, as you know, if you followed all this, I could tell you more about how that group fell short. But I don't think anybody's tried to hold accountable the people on that police commission for being asleep when they should have been awake and being an apologist for the police chief when it became clear that something was awry. So what about the Office of Disciplinary Counsel? We lawyers know that's kind of that, like the police, if you will, for us lawyers. We do something wrong. ODC, the Office of Disciplinary Counsel, they're there. And there were lawyers involved in all of this. Well, the person kind of at the middle of the mailbox conspiracy, this person that the federal prosecutor described as a walking crime spree. I'm staying away from using people's names today, but there were very serious allegations made against her in complaints filed with the Office of Disciplinary Counsel that for whatever reason went nowhere, and to my knowledge weren't put back on track and went so, I don't know, maybe good explanations, I don't know. But it was later determined that she had been stealing from banks, from orphans, from, again, a walking crime spree. And yet ODC didn't get involved, to my knowledge, at any stage of any of this. You've got the Ethics Commission. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm condemning or judging, because maybe there's some really great explanations. My overarching message here is that we need a process of going back and finding out what went wrong with these various watchdogs. With the Ethics Commission, with hindsight, something was awry, because there were some very serious, credible allegations made to the Ethics Commission involving two of the main players, the police chief and his wife, the senior prosecutor. And
just clarification, you're talking about the Honolulu Ethics Commission.
Absolutely, thank you. The Honolulu, the County Ethics Commission.
Thank you, Chair.
And at a key point in time, they lost funding, essential funding, to continue the investigation without the city's manager really explaining, to my knowledge, what that was all about. At some point, it seemed to me directly related to the pursuit of these two politically connected individuals, the police chief and the senior person from the prosecutor's office. At some point, the executive director of the Ethics Commission lost his position, and that whole investigation was just simply put on hold. And to my knowledge, never resumed, ever. I know a lot of the people on a lot of these watchdog organizations that I'm referring to, And frankly, every one of them, in my opinion, is a good person. Every one of them, in my opinion, is a smart person, a person who works hard. I got nothing but good things to say about it as an individual. But looking at these watchdogs as institutions, something is wrong. Something was wrong back then. I could keep going. The prosecutor's office, oh my goodness, the prosecutor's office, the prosecutor not only didn't do something under the heading of the watchdog function, he fought the investigation. He, who knows, may have done other things, destroyed evidence or what have you. We'll find out he's one of the various people who have been indicted. The police department, the subsequent police chief, right after the one who's in prison right now, to my knowledge, didn't really do anything to change anything within the department. She basically said, well, we just had a few bad apples and the rest, the vast majority of everyone else in the department, we're out here already regaining the public's trust. Well, let me just say, as a member of the public, that's a bunch of BS, in my opinion. In my opinion. The mayor's office, well, the mayor at that time, at various times, he'd be asked questions, say, well, I can't really comment on that. There's an investigation going on. And well, that's really something that the police commission is working on right now. Can't really comment. And then when these various people were actually convicted and it became crystal clear that they had this major, major scandal, his quote, and I quote, "It's time to move on. It's time to move on." We need to have, and I assume it's some sort of panel, like the individuals on this panel. Maybe that would be a good start. I don't know. Obviously, it's far beyond your mission, as you've been given a mission and resources thus far. But whether it started with you or not, there needs to be a panel that the public would perceive as not insiders, not people who went to school with the people who these watchdog organizations, didn't see doing anything wrong, that didn't serve on boards with them. That's not one of them. And it's tough in a state, especially a state long dominated by a single political party. I think it'd be just as bad if it was a different political party. I sometimes think the libertarians would be the worst of them all, and I'm just kidding on that, kind of kidding. My point, though, is that if the goal, and I started by saying, to me, the end game's all about public trust, you've got to have, and I don't want to call it a truth commission, that's not a good label. You need to have a group that the public perceives as not part of the in crowd, part of the out crowd, if you will. People that are maybe kind of known as troublemakers in one way or another. One of the worst places I think around for an absence of transparency and accountability is the Hart Board. And anyone who's paid any attention at all to what's gone on there in recent years would say, boy, Joe Uno, if Joe Uno was essentially kicked off the Hart Board because his credentials were too good and he was asking too many tough questions, and he clearly wanted to get to the bottom of just what had gone wrong and why it had gone wrong and all of those sorts of things. Somebody like that, or Alexander Silvert, this public defender that I've described as having done the world's greatest lawyering job. Perfect individual, perfect for a variety of reasons, including he's retired now. And it helps to have somebody who, relatively speaking, can't be hurt. They're not as susceptible to any sort of favor or punishment of one sort or another for stepping on the wrong toes. Loretta Sheehan, and I'm not promoting any of these people. I'm just trying to give you a flavor for people who have, I guess by the in crowd standard, some of them are kind of looked at like troublemakers, Bob Wattada. There are some people that I think the public, if you had a board, a commission, whatever you call it, made up of some people like that, and if they were told and given the necessary resources, the necessary tools, if they were told to get in there and ask whatever politically insensitive question they think needs to be asked, and not to go in with the idea of trying to punish some individual for something that's gone on sometime in the past, I think that would be counterproductive. I think the whole idea has to be, we're just trying to figure out why the system that, quite frankly, I think our system, I don't know if I'd call it modeled, but whether it's open records or sunshine or what have you, I think there's a lot to be said for our system for accountability and transparency as being a model of sorts. Or just Judicial Selection Commission, and I could go down the list, a model. And yet our watchdogs in these two scandals that I've chosen to highlight failed miserably. And we just need to know why. How did that happen? And at the end of the day, it all comes down to people. And Neil Milner, I thought, did a terrific job of talking about a whole bunch of things, including the possible impact of being in a one-party state. But I think it's also obvious to those of us who live here and want to continue living here and have family members and what have you, that the cost of not being able to thrive in Hawaii, not having a good job that pays well, your kids having good jobs that pay well, getting in the right schools, whatever it might be that you need to thrive, the cost of not thriving in Hawaii is huge. I'm from Western Kansas. You step on the wrong toes there, you can move to Denver, you can move to Omaha, you can move to Tulsa. You got a lot of places you can move to and be a half day or less drive to visit grandma. Hawaii is completely different. And also in Western Kansas, you don't necessarily have to thrive in order to live the way you might want to live there, because the cost of living is just dramatically different and the job situation is dramatically different. In Hawaii, if you want to thrive, it's tough to go out there and say what you really want to say without saying, gee, is this going to tick off the wrong people? So I apologize, this has taken longer than I intended. I've worked real hard at boiling down what probably started off as 3 hours of testimony, but that's what I have to say, and I hope it's of some benefit to you.
Okay, ask a question.
Sure. I think our chair has a question for you.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Randy. That was an eloquent presentation. And also thank you for your work as being one of our effective watchdogs. It's not just Ali Silver. The phrase you use, go along to get along. And that seems to permeate a lot of what you've talked about. There's some in the cases you talked about and other cases we're aware of where there's criminal activity. That's one category. But then there's another group where people are acting to benefit,
right?
Financially, position. But then these watchdogs and others that don't have any real pecuniary interest, are not committing crimes, they turn the other way, or they see it and they remain silent. Now, you at the end of your talk, you kind of pointed out maybe one reason why, we're sort of a small community and we're all kind of stuck with one another and have to work with one another. But how do you go about, changing? Is it possible that so people are more forthright and calling out something that's wrong? How do you go about doing that in our community?
I think what I've talked about is public trust as the end game. That's what we're really after is public trust. If you do something that really does begin the process of regaining public trust in a very meaningful sort of way, I think that's going to help change the culture of people who maybe serve on watchdog organizations that become part of, I don't know, a code of silence or kind of, there's some worse ways of describing it, but part of the human condition, and you know this at least as well as I do, being a judge, you deal with a lot of interesting situations. Part of the human condition is we all act out of self-interest all the time, and we all have an amazing capacity to convince ourselves that we're honorable people doing the right things, even while we're acting in self-interest. And of course, we've got free will, and it's our job to push self-interest to the side to the extent we can and do the best for others. But the self-interest is there. So I don't think we're ever going to have what I'll call a perfect world with everybody speaking up when they need to speak up and being brave no matter what's at stake for them personally. But if we can really regain trust, I think there are people who will speak up. I think they will be encouraged and empowered and reinforced in wanting to do the right thing. Because I think all of us want to do the right thing. It's just that it gets more complicated when you get to the specifics of that situation. Yes.
Well, thank you again for your magnificent presentation. It's been my observation that a lot of very bad things have allowed to happen here because of a lack of watchdogs doing their job, both in the cases that you described, as well as in the ordinary course of government sometimes. Look at what's going on in our public safety department here, where you have an inmate, off suicide watch being placed into solitary. That is like textbook example of what not to do in a correctional situation. But, that's just, the tip of the iceberg when it comes to that department. You have a police commission here in Honolulu that is basically powerless to provide effective oversight. In fact, if you look at the charter language, it exempts them from having oversight over administrative functions. So in some respects, it's intentionally impotent. So what kind of mechanisms beyond, the sort of the ombudsman style panel that you recommended would be sufficient for, battling some of the more conspicuous dysfunction and incidences of corruption? Should we have inspectors general, state inspectors general here? Because it's pretty clear to me that, a lot of people just do what they do, not just to get along. They're able to do it because there is no accountability and until the feds come in. And that should clearly not be, our baselines, just to get along until you get caught by the feds. I don't think that's the kind of polity that most people in Hawaii want to live in.
Yeah, the public right now, I think, not only lacks trust, it's quite cynical. And I think it would be counterproductive to say, you know what, the watchdogs failed miserably in these two major scandals, broken trust and mailbox conspiracy, but we're going to fix it by creating a new watchdog. I think somebody who's already cynical is going to say, yeah, right. Why don't you fix it by putting in bold the laws that say you can't do this, you can't do that, et cetera. So I'm very hesitant about that. Whether it's a new watchdog or it's empowering the existing watchdogs or whatever it might be, if they're filled with political insiders, if the public recognizes that these are people who are on the inside, that's a problem. And you mentioned the young man who took his life in prison. I don't think we'd even know about that. If it weren't for the efforts of his dad. And whether it's Pat Tummins with Environment Hawaii, basically on her own, finding that outrageous bribery scandal that's going on right now on the Big Island. Or it's someone's dad. Or it's Alexander Silver, this federal public defender. We as a community got to find ways of saying that was magnificent. That was magnificent. I don't think we do a good enough job of that.
Thank you.
Let me
Okay.
ask you, I don't want to hog it if there's other commissioners, but this commission has a mandate, and knowing you, Randy, you went on our webpage and you read the resolution, you have an idea of what our mandate is. If this commission, in its report of December 1, comes in with a package of recommendations and more disclosure, more transparency, giving resources to the watchdogs, the Ethics Commission, the Campaign Spending Commission, more open proceedings in the legislature as recommended by Brian Black, term limits and other things, especially things that you could see in the poll this morning that the public thinks would help restore integrity and therefore public trust. If we came in with a comprehensive package to make government more transparent and more accountable, and the legislature passed it next session, do you think that would be a step in terms of restoring public trust in government?
The problem I have is, even though I'll probably agree with most, if not all, of the package that this particular group would come up with after having listened to the testimony and having known some of you for a long, long time, interacted with some of you like you many times, I just assume those would be really good recommendations. The problem I have is that if there is too much there, it becomes easy to say, yeah, look, we're going to do this and this and this and this, but we can't do everything all at once. So we're not going to do something that I'm sharing with you, I believe is absolutely essential. And that is going back and what is called the Truth Commission. Again, terrible name, but got to have the right description. It's got to find out, why did those rules for transparent, why did open records, et cetera, why did the rules for transparency and accountability, why did they not work? Why did the watchdogs not do their job? I think anybody in the political crowd is going to do everything they possibly can without admitting that this is actually what they're trying to do. I think they'll do everything they can to prevent what I'm describing, because it would not be pleasant for them or people that they care about.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank you.
That's terrific presentation. We really appreciate your being here very much.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Randy.
We did have a summary that Nikos had prepared of different ways that the public departments reported struggles with complying with sunshine and open records laws. It's on the website, and since we already touched on those things and it's after 4, maybe we should call it a day.
Okay, we'll go to other matters then. Robert, did you want to announce our next meeting and what the subject matter would be?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so on August 17th, so we're going to take it'll be 3 weeks from today instead of our customary 2 weeks. We'll be meeting again, same time, 2 o'clock to, I usually have 4:30, but apparently 4. And the focus will be on legislative process. There may be some overlap here with some of the topics in this panel, but specifically maybe addressing, for example, issues with conference committee, issues with power of a chair of a committee, et cetera. Those types of issues would be sort of ripe for discussion. And again, very briefly, if people have suggestions for speakers or other things to kind of get into it, the current intent may be to sort of ask a diverse, small but diverse group of legislators to help come in and maybe give their mana'o on the legislative process, with the intent of actually then also listing some of the different questions and topics that have been brought up in the public submissions, with an attempt to try to see if there are potentially solutions that we can propose coming out of that.
Okay. Does any commissioner have anything else before we close the meeting? Kristen?
Yeah, just so for a point of clarity then, Robert, we're going to cancel our August 10th meeting, or rather schedule it for August 17th. What happens to our August 24th? We're going to keep that?
We currently don't have an August 24th meeting that I'm aware of scheduled, and it's probably something that we do need to try to talk about briefly. I don't want to extend this for too long, but one of the I think it'd be reasonable for us to maybe do sort of a comeback session where we sort of catch up on some of the proposals that have been discussed in the various different topics, with the idea of sort of saying, okay, where are we going with them? What's the drafting process? What's the next steps, et cetera? It might be a briefer meeting, but I think it may be appropriate to think about that. As far as the scheduling of it, I am, again, the main reason for pushing to the 17th is just I wasn't available on the 10th. So hopefully the commission's understanding of that.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I just for me, if we can start, what I did was when we decided to do this, I just booked every 2 weeks and just sort of blocked it a bit. But if we're going to readjust, that's fine. I just need to get it on my calendar. So if you guys do decide sooner rather than later, would be really helpful for me. Just saying. Thank you.
Well, maybe very quickly, I mean, just since we're all here and for 2 minutes or less, would we be comfortable with coming back on the 24th and just doing a check-in meeting with the idea, particularly for the facilitators who have led a meeting, maybe just sort of doing a check-in of what more do we need to do? Do we need to have another topic, another panel on that topic? Just sort of it might be a briefer meeting, but it's just an idea that in a public forum, just have discussion.
Okay, so why don't we schedule that? We'll have, and that will bring us, Kristen, back in on our cycle, right? So we'll, after the August 17th, we'll meet August 24, 2 p.m. here, and we'll basically use that meeting to figure out how we're going to finish this commission and the meetings we have coming up after that and what they will be. We'll discuss that on the 24th. Is that okay, Kristen? Flo, do you have anything?
Thank you.
Anything more, Janet?
I don't think so.
Okay, I want to thank everyone again. Thank you, Professor Roth. Thank you for sticking with us.